Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the importance for more advanced lifters in rotating exercises to prevent overuse injuries. Now, when I talk about stuff like this, if you're a novice lifter, I'm not talking about you. We're not talking about you at all. Novice lifters probably don't need to do more than about 6 to 8 basic exercises. They need to master those movements. Okay, they need to master those movements and get as strong as possible at them. However, as we get more advanced, what we find is that by rotating exercises and rotating the loads regularly, because we aren't going to make fast gains anyways, we're not going to make fast gains. By rotating these movements, what we end up finding is that we become more resistant to injury. We become more resistant to injury in general. And I don't just mean injury in the weight room, I mean injury across the board. And if any of you guys watched the very long and very boring debate between Dr. Mike Israetel and Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum about injury a month or two ago, something that Jordan pointed out is something that a lot of us have known for a long time, is that lifters who vary their loads, meaning different variations of movements, whether it's their rep work, their max effort work, whatever, who vary their loads tend to be more adapted to handling awkward loads. They tend to be more injury resistant to grabbing awkward loads in the real world, more injury resistant on a max lift if something goes wrong and you get out of your groove. Okay, this is one of the reasons that the West Side system of always changing max effort exercises is one of the reasons it exists. Now, there are psychological reasons for that, and that's a whole other topic I should cover later. There are psychological reasons for it. However, one of the physiological reasons is that your body adapts to and gets used to different loads being pulled against joints, different strength curves, things like that. Well, what happens? Well, as a result of that, your connective tissue and everything develops to handle these different loadings. When you do very, very little variation, the way the novice is supposed to train, in other words, minimalist type training, you tend to not be resilient to different awkward loads and angles. So for more advanced lifters though, because we're going to stall and stagnate on doing single movement anyway, when we rotate lifts, a lot of times we can get a novel training response. Arguably, that's sometimes psychological. That is sometimes psychological. In other words, it's not uncommon for 2 to 3 weeks to push a movement really, really hard, and then as soon as it stagnates, we switch to a different bar. Maybe we switch to a different variation, and then push that for progression. Now, the interesting thing with a lot of that is that you'll have people who will say, well, that's neuromuscular. Well, is it really always neuromuscular? If it's a close variation, it's not as much so as you would think for an advanced lifter who's good with movement patterns. You might get one workout where it is, but you know what? Sometimes that one workout ends up being a slight deloaded workout, doesn't it? Okay, and if you have a slight deloaded workout, body can recover a little bit, and they're still challenging sets. And people need to remember that. If you're doing limit sets with a different barbell, what happens? Well, you're still hitting the upper threshold fibers, you're still stimulating growth, but then you get stronger at it, and then we create more tension. Now, there's obviously the argument about what came first, the chicken or the egg, as far as tension versus hypertrophy. I tend to lean in the direction that increased tension is evidence of hypertrophy. Whereas in guys like Law McDonald will say that it is the cause of hypertrophy. It's big debates, big argument. But either way, you're still seeing it both ways. You're still getting limit sets, still seeing an increase in tension. Then there's the psychological component, of course. You've added 5 pounds or 10 pounds to a lift that you just started doing again over 2 to 3 weeks for your work sets. Okay, that's psychologically motivating. You see progression happening. That creates a placebo effect that enhances your overall training, positive mental association with your training. Then guess what? You will get a positive effect. It's how powerful our minds are. It's why placebo anabolics work in studies. They work. Placebo anabolics work in studies. So we get a positive psychological effect from that, of seeing progress. But let's come over and look at some of these things you see me doing here. Right, I do axle bar Pendlay rows in the same week that oftentimes I do inverse rows. Right, I do those in the same week because I'm not willing to take the Pendlay row out. If I need variation, I just have to add variation. But we can vary grips and stuff on the inverted rows. We can vary foot angles. And so by changing these different angles around slightly, what happens? We train all of our muscles and our tendons and everything to have different lines of pull for a lot of this volumes of training. All right, a lot of our training volume is where we get our hypertrophy. It's where we get our muscle mass. It's where we hypertrophy connective tissue, right? Because our maxes are a slightly different beast. We don't get as much from those. So varying those can help with injury prevention, but more of learning to handle loads from different angles to get back in your groove. These movements actually, if we vary these things, or let's say you rotate every 2 to 3 weeks, let's say you change bar, change your grip, making it a new exercise, change from, if you don't have different bars, which you should have different bars, you're going to be serious about getting strong, you better go to a gym that has different bars. Or you need to build a home gym at that point. You can change grip. Hell, you can throw a fat grip on a regular bar if nothing else. You can switch for your volume work from barbell to dumbbells. Bench press to a floor press. You can create a mild incline or decline. Okay? You can do that. Mild changes in angle, mild changes in bar path, close variations. If we're rotating through them all the time, particularly again for our movements that build most of our tissue, our assistance work, our accessory work, our volume training, we tend to make our connective tissue more resilient to injuries. Okay, we tend to make it more resilient to injuries because it's used to different awkward loads. And it doesn't mean that we need 5 different movements in the same workout. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. We can rotate through them over time. You know, because a lot of times we don't have room for a lot of different variation. Like most of us who are serious lifters, and yes, I do mean most serious lifters. A lot of you guys are doing push-pull legs 3 times a week or whatever it is you think you're doing. You're probably not as serious as you think you are. We're doing upper lower 4 days a week. That's the baseline for most serious athletes and elite lifters. Okay, that's pretty common. Very, very common. Well, we really only have room sometimes for 2 chest presses, and it might be 10 sets of it every week. You might be doing 5 sets of it both days. All right. We don't have a lot of room for variation within the week always. Now, I do because a lot of times I do 2 different chest presses, but I do a ton of training volume. I do more volume than a lot of you should be doing. Just throwing that out there. But we don't have a lot of room for variation. And if we just do the same one sometimes both days and just keep pushing it, we can get some progression out of it. And then you can always change it. Like even for me with my speed work, notice I do stuff like deficit pulls on speed work, right? We start adjusting range of motion. It's like you see here, this is speed pulls. But you know, you can do the same thing with your normal deadlifting. We can change it an inch, 1 inch deficit, or a 1 inch block pull through different phases. Right, we can vary the heights of our box squats. All right, that different inch, we still fall into the exact same concept. Start playing with different ranges of motion. Again, changes the strength curves. In the case of the deadlift, you can change your entire hip position. So by doing this stuff, we prepare our body to handle different awkward loads. Right? We have to hypertrophy the connective tissue for variation. Furthermore, instead of doing what some people think, oh, let's just do 5 different movements in 1 week. No, do a lot of volume with one movement and then change it every 3 weeks. We avoid overuse. By rotating through these movements, we tend to avoid overuse. Sometimes if we just do the same movement over and over and over and over with no variation, that's where we get connective tissue inflammation, where we start to get overuse injuries. By just swapping this stuff, taking an actual slot, like your main chest press slot, and simply switching from a barbell to a different barbell, or to dumbbells, or adjusting the range of motion, we can largely avoid a lot of the risk of overuse injuries. It means we can keep our training volumes higher, right? Because overuse is a big concern with really higher volumes of training also. We can keep our volumes higher, we can avoid overuse also. Okay, this is a valuable tool for preventing injuries. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.